This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
Theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
Significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. Washington is a city filled with political animals and history buffs. It's the seat of the U.S. government and a showplace for monuments and museums. It's also the home of one of the most iconic horror stories of all time, The Exorcist. The movie, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary, has gotten a re-release just in time for Halloween, a sort of companion piece to a reboot of the franchise itself, The Exorcist Believer. But it all started with a novel by William Peter Blatty, who set the story at his alma mater, Georgetown University, which provided the perfect setting for a tale of faith and horror. Lou Bayard, author of such novels as The Pale Blue Eye, Jackie and Me, and The School of Night, knows a thing or two about The Exorcist, writing with Washington as a background, and horror. He joins the podcast today to talk about The Exorcist, DC, and things that go bump in the night. Lou, welcome to Political Theater.
Great to be here.
Great to have you. For those people who don't live on Capitol Hill, Lou and I know each other because we're part of a roving band of irregulars who drink coffee in the morning. Lou is usually working while we're just farting around and drinking coffee.
You're solving the world's problems, all of you. You guys are fixing it. You're fixing it.
Yeah. I don't know about that, but it's a fun bunch. Of quite a few of us are writers or journalists or retired journalists. There's a few people who have even written stories about ghosts in DC. But
guys.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason that one of the reasons that I thought this was a perfect time to have you on, Lou, is that we got to know each other over the last couple of years, particularly in the pandemic, when we're all sitting outside shivering and writing. Right. But recently you wrote a piece for the Washington Post Book World in which you discussed the Exorcist, the novel. And again, this is I feel like it's such a great story, and it's also such a great Washington, sort of book too, and movie. So let's talk a little bit about the Exorcist history, and then we'll get into like sort of your relationship to it as a kid, reading the book and the movie. But I mean the Exorcist. This is again one of the biggest horror stories of all time, and it's set right here in our backyard.
It sure is, yeah. Georgetown, and of course the famous Exorcist Steps, which are now a regular tourist destination for anybody coming to the city. Yeah, I mean, William Peter Blatty went to Georgetown as an undergrad and was deeply attached to the place. He would say later that was the place that it pretty much saved his life. He had a very hard scrabble upbringing in New York City with a kind of impoverished con artist for a mom. And he somehow got out of there with the help of some priests and got himself to Georgetown. And so it was very special to him all his life. So I think it's probably a natural fit for him to set a horror story there.
He also, just as a, sort of an aside, I mean, he not only, went to school there and set a couple of his stories there, including, a sequel to The Exorcist, a book called Legion, which he then went on to write and direct as one of the Exorcist sequels. Mm-hmm. But he was he died in 2017, but he was a regular at like the Tombs, into his like late years. I mean, he would still go down there and have lunch at the Tombs. And, Georgetown used to have a lot more bookstores and antique stores. It's a little bit more, Nike Superstore and Sephora and stuff like that. Now it's a little bit more shopping mall-esque, but it never it is still not lost its charm / creepiness.
Well, it was a much sketchier place when he was writing the book. We're talking about 1970. This is Nixon era Georgetown. There were head shops and places, kind of dive bars like the Tomb. So it didn't have the same kind of elitist qualities that it has now. But yeah, but it also had these crazy row houses and then these steps that just sort of dived into nowhere. I think the steps originally led to a gas station at some point or other. I'm not sure what they lead to anymore. But
It's still a former gas station, yeah, and it's right next to the old one of the old car barns
that's right.
for
That's right.
streetcars. But yeah, and that's right. I mean, in the book, I actually I thought I would be able to get a used copy. I had trouble finding a used copy around DC, but I just went to East City Bookshop, not too far from Peregrine, where
A
we
local
coffee.
bookseller. Well done. Well done.
Yeah, and bought a new copy, which is quite nice. But yeah, I mean, right off the bat in the book, I mean, again, this is a genre novel. This is a horror novel, but he almost sets it up like you would any kind of traditional novel, where I mean, he sets the scene. He talks about the steps, he talks about M Street and the river, and just and it's this gloomy setting that just goes. It's you can see almost the screenwriter in him, and he was a screenwriter.
Yes, yes.
At that before The Exorcist, known as well. Probably his biggest hit was as a screenwriter was one of the Pink Panther sequels, Shot in the Dark.
I think it's the best of them still, actually. But he specialized in sort of frothy, not very demanding comedies of all things. His first novels were comic novels, and he kind of worked steadily, mostly with Blake Edwards. And then but it did have some flops along the way. The biggest one was probably Darling Lily, which was a musical vehicle for Blake Edwards' wife, Julie Andrews, and Rock Hudson. So it really stank it up at the box office. And so I think he was at some point looking for a way back in. I mean, he was a creature of Hollywood, and he was looking for a success. I think he would have read The Prevailing Winds and realized, oh, wait a minute, Rosemary's Baby was a huge hit as a book by Ira Levin and as a movie. And it's about a demon. It's about a maiden, an innocent person who is violated. So I think I would imagine that Rosemary's Baby is kind of the true progenitor of The Exorcist in some ways.
And also, I mean, there was some darkness, even in the Peter, or the Pink Panther movies. I have fortunately / unfortunately seen all of them. At a certain point, they were a big part of my childhood because they were always on TV. And Shot in the Dark has this the big set piece in it is this like sort of trail of assassinations where like assassins are trying to kill Elke Summer or Peter Sellers, and they just they keep missing, and so it's just like this trail of death throughout the night, which is one of the things that finally sets Inspector Dreyfus, played by Herbert Lom,
I was going to say he's going steadily more insane with each minute in that movie. Yeah, so you're right, it does have some darkness to it.
And then so let's talk about how you lead in with this book world. I'll hold it up for the benefit of our users. Again, there's the iconic steps there in Washington, which if you're ever trying to get in shape, walk up those a couple of times and you'll be just fine. If you don't have a heart attack. But talk about this because you grew up in the area. I grew up in
the area, Springfield, Virginia, and and as I said in the article, my parents let me watch pretty much every R-rated movie coming out. I mean, I would have been 9 or 10 when I saw The Godfather, for instance. I saw Serpico. I saw all these R-rated movies because my parents thought, whatever they don't know is not going to trouble them. But The Exorcist is where they drew the line. And I think that's because The Exorcist it's hard to explain to people younger than myself what a sensation The Exorcist was when it opened. I mean, the word of mouth was extraordinary. And people were lining up around for blocks and blocks to get in because there were all these reports of people fainting, of people having kind of seizures or something. It was a real difference it was a real change in the relationship, I think, between movies and the audience, that people really went in there, either hoping to be shocked or fearing to be shocked. But that it was a time when movies actually could shock people. I think we're no longer there.
And it was also a departure from other horror movies. I mean, I think, at this point, the Hammer films, with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, the Dracula movies and the Frankenstein movies were starting to, reach their nadir, and they had become almost kind of silly. But really, you don't, even when you watch like the traditional old Universal monster movies, like, the James Whale, Frankenstein, and so forth. People there were no reports of people fainting,
Yeah.
when Karloff, makes, comes, is proclaimed alive, or when Bela Lugosi, bites a neck. But this really freaked people out. And I think it has a lot to do with the religious part of it. I mean, that seems to be where this religious horror aspect of it really freaked people out.
Oh, that's definitely an element to it, and it's a major element. Certainly, this is at some level a faith journey for Father Karras, who's the de facto hero of the piece, even more than the official exorcist. He's the one who's there trying to save this girl. But of course, it was also shocking because of the language. The language is coming out of a 13-year-old girl's mouth for 1973. That was pretty raw, and Blatty didn't stint on stuff. At one point. Reagan, the girl, is masturbating with a crucifix, shoving her mother's face in it. It's so intense. And that in a way that must have felt really overwhelming, I think, for some viewers. Just to go back in history, though, supposedly people fainted when in the very first Phantom of the Opera, when Lon Chaney had his mask removed. And I would guess people had some scares in Psycho, which came out 13 years before The Exorcist, but yeah.
And then again, like talk about things that are shocking. I mean, like Psycho broke a lot of the rules because, spoiler alert, they kill the main character, the star, with the infamous shower scene. So, and I feel like the Exorcist also. I mean, I was interested how closely the book tracks with the movie. I mean, granted, that's not a surprise because Blatty wrote both the novel and the screenplay. The director, William Friedkin, another strong personality to rival Blatty's, in terms of intensity and so forth, seemed to know what he, what he had and sort of just put it full throttle. And I don't know if this book works without Georgetown, because it seems to me, I mean, again, like not to go out on a limb about this, but there's something particularly in the movie and particularly in the descriptions in the novel that get to the issues of faith and issues of just haunting. There's a lot of stuff that happens that's kind of unexplained, in both. And it all happens within the context of like with the Jesuits. The Jesuits are the intellectual centerpiece of the Catholic Church, so they're frequently portrayed as people who are doubting their faith or exploring it. Certainly, Father Karras is. He doesn't. I mean, he's having a crisis of faith, and it's just it seems like if this was just in, I don't know, like a suburban Indianapolis, perhaps, not to pick on it may not have the same kind of context with it, because Georgetown, in addition to being this center of university life, was also it's a little haunted itself. I mean, this is where slaves were unloaded, McRiver. I mean, there's a lot of bad things that happened in this area, and the light and the fog and the canals and the creepiness and the architecture it's a character to itself.
Oh, for sure. And then you also have official Washington kind of making periodic arrivals, appearances. I think there's an ambassador at one point that the mother, Chris, has some kind of reception and has some kind of Washingtonian types who come into it. I think there's an astronaut there. So there is this sense of it. What I found hilarious when I reread the book after all these years was that what the movie they're filming there is supposedly a musical version of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which I find hilarious. And of course, we know that if you're going to film in Washington these days, you wouldn't be filming in Washington because it's so hard to get any kind of. You'd be doing it in Baltimore or
right.
NCIS films everything in LA, and it's quite obviously so. So there is a sense of an official government out there, but you're right. Georgetown is the center of this piece. This is a Georgetown centered story, and the locations are. You get all the street numbers. At one point, Chris, the mother, says, "Stay away from M Street, stay from and N Street too." It's like, stay away from M Street. times have changed because M Street is not a place you need to stay away from anymore.
Yeah, as is evidence from the traffic. I mean, I stay away from it because I don't have an extra hour to get from 36th Street to 20th
Exactly.
3rd
Yeah.
Street.
Give me the Whitehurst Freeway every single time. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that is, I mean, there's some of this in the movie. There's a lot more of it in the book. These little, almost sort of in jokes about movie making. Like particularly at the beginning. Before things get pretty heavy. When Chris is sort of having this sort of debate about whether a scene works. On the campus, and it's kind of funny. I mean, it's almost misplaced a little bit, but it also, because this is you're like, okay, where's the vomit? Where does the vomit come out? Or her head turning around and so forth, or levitations. But it also makes the novel. I think this is what pluses up the novel a little bit, is that it has these little, like these details that come, I would assume, directly from Blatty's experiences in Hollywood.
Yes, the director in the movie, the director character who is killed, the first person killed by the demon, was based on J. Lee Thompson, I think, who was a director that Blatty worked with. One of the interesting things about the movie too is how much of it actually was filmed here. It's one of the reasons Friedkin went over budget. He insisted on location shooting, both in D.C. and New York. And so it really is Washington you're looking at, and that gives it definitely a DC flavor as well.
So tell us about your own relationship to horror, because a lot of your work, if it's not horror per se, it has elements of it. I'm certainly thinking of Pale Blue Eye, which you wrote a novel, and several years later it came into our lives on Netflix with Christian Bale, and I'm always forgetting the guy who was the from Harry Potter, who plays
Harry Melling. Harry Melling.
Harry Melling. This is a very, this is a murder mystery, but it's also, again, it doesn't work without the setting, without West Point, without the cold, without the weirdness of antebellum America. So tell me how, as an author, like your relationship to horror. I mean, obviously you were reading The Exorcist when you're 9 years old. So it was early onset horror fandom. But how has that shaped who you are as a writer?
That's a really good question. I hadn't considered it in the long form, but I've always been fascinated by horror because I think it shows us kind of at our most extreme. One of the things I love about Poe's work, for instance, and he's the central character in Pale Blue Eye, is he thought human beings are capable of pretty much anything and everything, and he was happy to follow that idea out to its furthest extreme. So his short stories are often just briefs for psychiatric intervention. It's like, really, Edgar? Okay, we're going there. One of them is about a man who's obsessed by his wife's teeth and winds up prying them out of her mouth while she's in a coma. So he was ready to follow that stuff as far as it could go. So I think that's why we look to horror sometimes and I think it's true in the current wave of dystopian horror, the Walking Dead and The Last of Us, shows like that are just showing us how bad human beings can be in extreme situations. So
we do seem to get the horror that we deserve at different times, or the horror we need. I mean, there's actually another adaptation of Fall of the House of Usher, which is set in like contemporary pharmaceutical company, story, which I haven't seen it, but it sounds like a fairly good contemporary thing. And to me, I was a latecomer to horror. I avoided horror as a kid. Actually, the first horror movie I'm pretty sure the first horror movie I saw was Exorcist II: The Heretic, which Blatty hated, disavowed, couldn't handle it. It is, a crazy movie. Richard Burton is obviously drunk, throughout almost all of it. He plays
drunk too if I'd had to be in that movie, I think.
Yeah, it does. It's mainly set in New York and in the desert. The sort of the pursuit of Pazuzu, the demon who possesses Reagan in The Exorcist. And you and I were joking when we were setting up this call that I said this thing scared me, and now I watch it now, and it's like there's James Earl Jones in a locust costume, and and I said it's the most batshit crazy movie I've ever seen, and then I thought like, oh, blat shit. and then we went on
and then we decided that blatty should be an adjective. It's like, yes. Oh my god, that is the blattiest movie I've ever seen in my damn life. Oh my god. Well, I will say that just the director of Exorcist 2 was John Boorman, who does have a couple really great movies to his credit.
God. I love him. Zardoz.
Zardoz. Well, Deliverance is a great movie, and Hope and Glory, which is a lovely kind of evocation of England during World War II. And then Point
Excalibur.
Yeah, no, he had talent. I just think he was a bit of a nut. I don't think there's been a successful Exorcist movie since the very first one. I don't know about how well the current one is doing, but they've tried again and again to kind of replicate it.
Yeah, they were prequels. So there was Exorcist, Exorcist 2, The Heretic, Exorcist 3, which Blatty himself adapted from his own novel Legion, which is he considered the more direct sequel. It's also set in Washington. With some of the same characters. And then there was some prequels that followed Father Marin, who's Max von Sydow's character, and that did well or not, like depending on how you think of it, but not blockbuster, not anything approaching the success of the Exorcist. And now we're an Exorcist believer, and I think there's going to be more.
There's two. I think it's first of a trilogy or something. Ellen Burstyn has been called back for this one. So, my thesis is that the Exorcist, what we took away from it is that when you have a devil, when you have supernatural issues, you call specialists, and that idea has been spun off toward in so many directions, like Ghostbusters and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So there's not much that a new Exorcist story can tell us that we haven't. We've seen devils in dolls and puppets, and we've seen serial killers, invading people's dreams. So as I said, we're not a shockable nation anymore. Right. We're just looking for the next shock.
And maybe that's the, we that's why we see these recasting or reboots, is that they're trying to go back to source material to figure out like, okay, where are we? And as you mentioned with like things like The Last of Us and The Walking Dead and so forth, the zombies, I mean, they've been around for a while. Night of the Living Dead, sort of rebooted that 50 plus years ago, and is still like sort of delighting people. But I do think that we sometimes we get like the type of horror movies that like we need at the time, and as you said, like dystopia seems to be in right now. I wonder why.
because we feel ourselves to be living in one, and we're looking for practical tips for surviving it, I guess. I don't know. Or it's just the feeling of, well, as bad as our world is now, it's not as bad as that, Right. We'll have Wi-Fi. I can still get coffee with my friends every morning. So I don't know.
What are some other, I was trying to think of like some other works, particularly novels, because I feel like they can be evocative in a different way, but movies too that are set in Washington that get outside of the horror, like of politics, or but like get into the some of the general spookiness. And there's a lot of cemeteries in this town.
There are.
It seems like a perfect thing. And I was thinking of Lincoln in the Bardo by Saunders, and how great a book that is about the dead. And this is about Abraham Lincoln processing the death of his son and going back to the cemetery where he is buried, which is right outside of Georgetown. And it's such because it's from the ghost's perspective, the ghosts in the Bardo, in that in between liminal state. And I was thinking of other places. I'm sort of surprised that more stories aren't, more creepy or horror like stories aren't set here that aren't, for laughs, say, or, granted, the politics and the history, as I said at the beginning, it sort of takes over. That's what Washington is known for.
Yeah.
We see this drama playing out right now with the the House of Representatives, as they have struggled to find a speaker.
I'm going to run for speaker. I've decided.
I
I'm
mean, you
just
don't
gonna
have to,
run.
you don't have to be a member of Congress.
My chances are as good as anybody at this point, I feel.
To make another movie reference. Yesterday we're taping this podcast on Wednesday, October 25th. But when Tom Emmer, dropped out, I just thought, this is starting to feel like the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. You don't know who's going to make it. I mean, don't get too attached to any of them. It's just a carnage,
But you're right. There should be more DC horror movies or books, and I'm hard pressed to think of any because it's a natural. We have
aside from your average Washington Commanders home game,
or the Nationals, depend some days. So I think we've got maybe this is a career path for us right here. we will plug this gap. But
well,
a lot of thrillers set in DC for sure. A lot of Way Out.
Some of which you have contributed to. I mean, I actually I have not read School of Night, but when I was looking through your bibliography, I thought that's promising. I mean, there's the other if people don't dig the kind of weird creepiness of cemeteries, then libraries.
Right, exactly. Oh well, then you get your Dan Brown, and you get your national treasures and stuff like that. So you definitely get that element to it. But straight up horror. Yeah, that's interesting because God knows there was a lot of horror. There were slave markets, of course. I think 10 Years a Slave. Is it 10 Years a Slave?
12 Years a Slave.
12 Years a Slave. Sorry, that's where he's first kidnapped, I believe, in Washington D.C.
Yeah, and I think that there are just these there are little pockets. I guess this is sort of a call to arms for all writers out there. I mean, just every once in a while I'll be in a weird part of DC and come across what's an old Civil War enforcement like sort of spot. There's one right off of Georgia Avenue. There's a little cemetery. Kind of near the old Walter Reed campus, which is this tiny little plot of land, and I don't know. It's an interesting place. So
we should add that our friend Tim Krepp has written nonfiction book. Well, we'll call them nonfiction books, ghost stories of various places, Georgetown,
and the Capitol. Yeah. So
yeah.
Talking about things like the blood in the marble steps in the house side and demon cat and so forth. Yeah.
And then we've got Congressional Cemetery, which has some really fascinating things. You've got J. Edgar Hoover's grave and Clyde Tolson's a few graves down.
Not together though.
Not together. Nope. No.
And also the only founding father. Somehow this feels appropriate. The only founding father buried in the Congressional Cemetery is Elbridge Gerry, who gave us gerrymandering. Legacy continues.
That is appropriate indeed. Anyway, but cemeteries are always wonderfully atmospheric. No, I think we need to create a new cottage industry. Just you and me.
I'm all for it. it'll be the next path. Well, Lou, thank you so much for talking about your own work and The Exorcist. This is our we didn't label it as the Halloween edition, but it just felt right, just in time for Halloween. Our neighborhood, we both live in Capitol Hill, will soon enough be inundated by 5 million children. All
exactly, especially East Capitol is the mecca.
Yes, it's like Mardi Gras for small children. And they may be more raucous than anything I've seen. Yeah. But happy Halloween to you, and thanks again for coming on Political Theater.
Sure, I'll see you around the hood.